all recall, over the last few weeks, we are exploring emotion. 2 weeks ago, we talked about emotion sort of in the broad strokes using this really interesting story. And last week, we spoke about anger. This week, we're going to talk about joy. Like, anger was heavy. It was like serious. And it was worth discussing. But today we're gonna hit something a little lighter, a little bit more joyful, if you will. And we're not going to waste any time. We're going to jump right in. We're going to look at a bunch of different stories. Some things might bring known reminders or things about Jewish ritual and experiences that you recognize, and some of it may not. But I think it'll be interesting nonetheless. So let's jump right in. I'm going to share my screen here. Can everybody see this? Give me a thumbs up. Amazing. Amazing. Great. I'm just going to make sure I got this all squared away so I can see everybody's face. Fantastic. Okay. I'm going to make one ask, which all of you will ignore as soon as I say it, which is try not to read ahead. Let one paragraph at a time. I promise I will guide you.
What did you say? Try not
to read ahead.
Oh.
I know it's hard. As soon as I say it, all you want to do is read what's left on the page. Totally fine. But try your best. Okay. We're going to jump right in. So the context of Masechet Psachim, which is the first one we're going to learn here, is, as you might imagine, the holiday of Passover. And in the tractate on Passover, there are lots of conversations about festivals. And you'll see this as something that comes up again in a second text that we'll learn. Sort of, what does a festival, what's the nature of a festival? And to be really clear, when the rabbis are talking about a festival, they're talking about the big ones. They're talking about Passover. They're talking about Sukkot. They're talking about Shavuot. They're talking about Rosh Hashanah. While there are other holidays, certainly festival is gonna be sort of fit in that category, those large categories. And yes, I know technically Rosh Hashanah isn't in the very limited category of chagim, of festivals, but you'll forgive me for that. Yes, Tybal, before we begin.
Just fast, I would have expected, since Sukkot is Chachag, the festival.
Ooh, you cut out. You cut out Tybal, but I think I knew where you were going, which was that Sukkot, which is known as Tybal was about to say, as Hechag, the holiday, the festival, and quintessentially so, especially one in which, as it says here in the text we're about to read, V'samachta v'chagecha, you should be joyful on your holidays. Why that wouldn't be the place we start with, and why wouldn't this conversation happen in Masechet Sukkah, where Sukkot is discussed? And Talmud is not as so linear as that. So we're talking about one festival, we're talking about other festivals too. Okay, let's jump right in. Can I get a volunteer to read this first text from Psachim? Can I get a volunteer to start us off?
Okay, if nobody else will do it, I'll do it.
Thank you, Sheila, for being our nachshon.
Huh?
Thank you for being our nachshon, our first one here.
Okay. The sages taught a person is obligated to gladden their children and the members of their household on a festival, as it is stated, and you shall rejoice on your festival, you and your son and your daughter and your manservant and your maidservant and the Levite and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow that are within your gates.
Great, Sheila, I'm going to pause you right there. So already we have a really interesting question that comes up, which is, what does it mean to be obligated to the feeling of joy? Right, if we're talking about feelings, and obligation is a complicated relationship with feelings in general. So let's start again, don't read ahead, but what do you think it means to be obligated to a feeling? In this case, joy.
Well, first of all, you have to know what brings joy to the person. And that will vary. What brings joy to a parent might not be what's joy to a child. Or especially when they're talking about a manservant and everybody else. I mean, that's
So I want to make one small. So I think great. I'm so glad you brought it up. I want to just remind folks that the bold is what the text of the Talmud itself, and the not bold is generally a comment. But here, the quote is only, "And you shall rejoice in your festival." And what Rabbi Steinsaltz has done is added the additional full verse here so that we have access to it. So great, an opportunity to talk about how formatting helps us understand here what the rabbis are highlighting and not highlighting, as the case may be. So, right, so you start us off by saying, well, it's conditional, it's dependent on various set of circumstances, perhaps what makes someone feel joyful. What else? What does it mean to feel obligated to a feeling, or to a joy in this case? What might it mean?
That you have to do, you have to find something.
Wait,
that
Sheila,
you-
let's let somebody else. Let's let somebody
Okay.
else. Yeah. I'll come back to you if nobody else has something to say. Yeah, Richard.
Perhaps having a good attitude.
So an obligation here is a reminder to like show up with a particular intent. Did I understand what you said, right?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, great. So right. So obligation may not be to a feeling, but to show up with a particular set of attitudes or intent, right? It's not that I have to feel joyful, I have to show up ready to feel joyful, perhaps. Something like that. Cool. I like that. David, and then Tybal. And we'll come back to you, Sheila, after that.
So maybe another way of looking at it is that since Judaism in general and maybe mitzvot in particular are about actions, maybe the way one fulfills a commandment to rejoice is by taking whatever actions are associated with the festival that might lead to joy. So, for example, we have wine on Shabbat. We also have wine on the festivals. We do a certain amount of singing. We gather together frequently, which is also a way of maybe inculcating joy because we enjoy each other's company. And we're doing it around the subject of the festival. Those are just a few things that I'm thinking. I'm sure there are other examples that others could give, but maybe that's the key, is that you're led to joy by taking certain actions, and maybe those actions are what rejoicing is as a way of producing joy.
Nice. So sort of the flip side of what Richard said, right? Richard talks about the intent, how you show up. And David, you're saying, well, the obligation is to do the things that would bring you joy, not that you have to feel them, right? So celebrating and being with family or eating or drinking or whatever the various things are, it's not that you have to feel joy, it's that you got to do some of the actions that would probably get you there if that were the case, something along those lines. All right, I think that makes sense. Yeah, Tybal.
What it reminds me of is there's an obligation to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, which isn't a feeling, but it's a habit of a way of being and an approach, and can be very difficult. No matter what, finding something. And I remember stretching, but to me, it's then the same kind of habit of mind. And I'll do the English secular, to force yourself, even when it might not be your inclination, to see the glass half full, not half empty. So I think those are, even though, as I said, it's not a feeling to give the benefit, I think it becomes almost midos, the habits that inculcate a certain kind of character.
Nice, right. It's sort of pulling in the middle ground between some of the other things we talked about, right? Which is there's a habitual, ritualized nature of this that might encourage us to feel a particular way, or we might be inclined towards a different one, and it's going to lead us in the right direction, right? Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, Sheila, I know you had something you were going to say before.
Yeah, well, I think it's been sort of hinted at, and that is, we believe in something being concrete. Yeah, you have an attitude, as Richard pointed out. That's part of it, because sometimes you drag kids to into the sukkah to do or anything, and they have such a negative attitude. Doesn't matter what you do. But the one thing that Judaism always says is you have to do it with something concrete. We're very concrete minded, mitzvot minded. We do things. But my original thought was everybody gets gladdened by something different. Now, when you're within a family, it's okay. It's also when you have new guests, having something new that they're not used to might gladden them. Or,
Great. I want to pause you, Sheila, because it's such a perfect transition to where we're going next. So why don't you read the next paragraph?
With what should one make them rejoice? With wine, Rabbi Yehuda says. One should enable each member of their household to rejoice with an item that pleases them. Men with what is fit for them, and women with what is fit for them.
Let me pause for a second.
Wow.
Let me pause. So you hit the nail on the head really early on, which is what should make somebody rejoice? The Gemara tells us wine. Wine makes people happy, which already is an interesting set of statements all by itself. But then Rabbi Yehuda brings up another piece, and Rabbi Steinsaltz sort of giving us some language in between, which is people should do what makes them feel happy. Now, the rabbis are predominantly a group of men talking to other men, and so they're going to make a bunch of wild assumptions here. And generally speaking, you may notice that I try and gender neutralize language in the Talmud when I translate it, because it doesn't matter for the most part. Like the context doesn't really matter. I left this here because it's being very clear that they are making a gendered set of statements. I don't agree with them, and I think there's in some cases it's very sexist, and we're about to read. We haven't even gotten into it yet, but I do think the principle remains true, which is the thing that Sheila had hinted towards before, and we're about to read, which is everybody needs something different. Here they're using a couple of examples that I wouldn't necessarily agree with, and you'll see even further other examples, but I think the principle is still valid, even if the examples aren't. All right, Sheila, keep reading.
I agree with you. I think that saying it's not sexist, what he's saying, men for men, what's fit for them, and women, what's fit for them. I think it's considering the fact that there are different things for different people.
Sure. The only reason why I'm saying we haven't read the part that I think is sexist, which is just the assumption that everybody likes the same thing within a gender. That's all. That's the point I was really making in the broad strokes, which is even categorizing men like some things and women don't, and vice versa, sets us into the wrong paradigm. I think the principle of people like what they like, and they don't all have to like the same stuff, still remains true. I just don't think the examples are particularly good. So why don't you, since you've been reading for us, keep reading for us the next part.
Rabbi Yehuda elaborates, men with what is fit for them, with wine. And as for the women, with what? Rav Yosef teaches, one should delight them with new clothes. In Babylonia, with colored clothes, and in Eretz Yisrael, with the pressed linen clothes that are manufactured there.
Great. I'm going to pause you again. So again, the principle remaining true here that I think is interesting when we talk about joy, not everybody finds the same stuff joyful. That's okay. That principle is being applied here, I think, appropriately. The assumptions that it's wine, it's definitely not true for everybody, or clothing, and what we're about to read in a second, meat, like those things aren't going to necessarily be true for everybody. Doesn't make it not true for somebody, but it's just, so that was the piece I wanted to sort of just highlight, which is whether or not Rav Yosef is right, maybe he's talking about his own wife. Nothing wrong with that. His wife might love clothing, right? It isn't negating anybody's feelings here. Just we should be careful when these sort of broad brush descriptions are happening here. I'm going to read the last section here. It was taught in a Braita that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira says, when the temple is standing, rejoicing is only through the eating of sacrificial meat, as it is stated, and you shall sacrifice peace offerings, and you shall eat there, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. Great, we have this quote from the Torah that says, you got to eat meat from the offerings. Really talk, we're not going to get into what the offerings are all about. That's a whole broader conversation. And you shall rejoice. So we got this language of joy in there, and that's when the temple is standing. And then Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira says, and now that the temple is not standing, and one cannot eat the sacrificial meat, and which is Rabbi Steinsaltz telling us, one can fulfill the mitzvah of rejoicing on a festival in which you would have given one of those offerings, only by drinking wine, as it is stated from the book of Psalms, and wine that gladdens the heart of man. So here we get a proof text. How do we know that wine gladdens men's hearts? And again, I'm using language very specifically here. The Psalms really say enosh, man, as opposed to Adam, a person. So again, I'm trying to be very careful with our language here. We have a proof text about wine, so we're making assumptions about wine. But it's really interesting.
Enosh doesn't have to be, by not using the word Adam, Enosh is humanity, isn't it?
It can. Here at the beginning it says Chayav Adam, so I'm sort of making that distinction. But I'll accept that I might be reading it wrong. That was the reason why I kept it as heart of man as opposed to a heart of a person. But neither here nor there. We have a proof text about wine, and we have this interesting dynamic about the temple. So before we move on, because we're not going to spend the whole time on this text, I got a couple others I want to talk about. What are we learning about joy in the broad strokes? Sort of just like, let's summarize what we've learned. And what are we learning about the relationship to the temple here? Because that's going to be important. What do people think? Raise your hand if you have a comment. You can just wave into the camera. That's good too. What are we learning here? Yeah, Sheila.
The temple is supposed to gladden us. Anything that's connected with the temple is to bring us gladness. And being able to share in the peace offerings is supposed to delight us.
Right. There were
not. And then but then he has to find a substitute. Actually, he's saying wine can be a substitute for the peace offering. And I hate to think that, again, remember, I have said in previous times, this is a hint of Christianity.
That's interesting. I have to think about that one. I don't want to get down that road too much. That's interesting. Right. So you've highlighted here for us, right? Which is the temple is a fundamental thing that exists in Judaism, and it's certainly very much a part of the rabbinic tradition. In particular, that it no longer exists, and because we are so tied to it in our rituals and in our customs, we have to replace this thing that we no longer have. It doesn't mean you can't feel joy. It just feels different, and it needs to be ritualized differently. David and then Maddie.
I think maybe you just already stated where I was going, but I'll just add in that between the first and the second temples wasn't that many years, although it took a while to rebuild. After the second temple, already a lot of time has passed by the time you get to the Talmud, but nothing like the amount of time that's passed up till now. So it seems to me that on the one hand, we still all, would love Mashiach to come now. And if that meant that we get the third temple, then we would start doing things we do in the temple. Whether that would look exactly like it did before, I don't know, and I don't want to go there right now. But the other side of the coin is the rabbis are kind of, as we've discussed before, when you've taught before, if you will, reinventing Judaism for a time when there's no temple. So maybe that's part of what's going on here. You know, we'd like there to be a temple, and if there were, we'd be doing this. But there's no temple, so let's have a long discussion about what we're doing now or could be doing in the future until there is one.
Yeah, I mean, the temple plays such a huge role both in the festival rituals in the broad strokes and in the specifics, and as you will find later, has a real impact on what does joy look like and feel like. And here we're learning festivals changed fundamentally. We have to observe joy in festivals. We're being told that, but how that happens has changed over the century with this fundamental change, which means that joy, the way we reach joy, according to this, can look like lots of different things and during different time periods, different eras. Yeah, Maddie.
And not only that, before we had a concrete temple where these things happened. Now And I think maybe this comes out more in Tractate Megillah, but now we read about what happened in the temple as a way of remembering it and maybe hoping for it, but at least remembering it. And then we do other things that aren't happening in a temple. They're happening in a synagogue, or they're happening in a home around a table, etc.
Yeah, I mean the temple features tremendously large in almost every aspect of Judaism in one way or another. Maddie, last word, and then we're going to move forward.
I don't know if I have like a specific point, but I just, whenever wine comes up in the Talmud, when it's related to like, you have to have this in order to celebrate, like I think about, first of all, in contemporary context, is that always a healthy way to rejoice for a person? And also getting, but beside that aside, is that a mitzvah because it helps you to celebrate? Like it allows, it sort of puts you in an altered state where you can, have that elevated celebration, or is it the wine itself and the essence of it, which we say blessings over all the time? Is it a combination of it? Did they need wine in order to feel like you could celebrate, or could you do it sober? I don't know.
Yeah, our relationship to alcohol today is very different than the Talmud. I think a lot of the same factors of what does it do to our mental space, how does it change our emotional states, things like that, those things remain true. The only thing I'll say, because I think your point was well made, is that the language in Psachim, when we talk about the 4 cups, which is obviously not what we're talking about here specifically. I mean, we are a little bit, but not in, we're here generally, but in the 4 cups, the language is mazgu, which means to mix. And so it's important to remember that during the time of the Talmud, as it was true in other time periods as well, which is that water wasn't always safe to drink. And so mixing it with alcohol made it safer to drink. And so alcohol played a very different role in society. You see this in the history of like England, for example, where a huge population was drinking mead and beer because it had a lot of calories and it was safe to drink, with the alcohol killing the things that were unsafe. All right, Helena, I saw you, but then we're going to move on. Yeah, go for it, Helena.
So mazgu means to just pour. It doesn't mean that you have to pour it with water.
In the context of the Gemara, it does. It might mean that different now, but in the context of the Gemara, in other places of Psachim, it means to mix water and wine together.
Didn't know.
It may not mean that now, as the language has changed, but in the context of the Gemara, it does. All right, let's keep going. Let's keep going.
How much alcohol is in the wine?
Right, there were a ton of factors. Yeah. I want to keep going because I don't want to get too deep into wine as a factor. I want to keep us focused on joy. So this one's on 2 pages. You'll forgive me. I like to keep things to 1 page, double-sided if I can. So therefore, here we are. Now we're in the Tractate Moed Katan, which is a very interesting tractate all of its own. Can I get a volunteer to read this text from Moed Katan? Again, it's also festival related. Yeah, Maddie, go for it.
Starting with Gemara, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. It was taught in the Mishnah that one may not marry on the intermediate days of a festival because it is a source of joy. The Gemara asks, and if it is a source of joy for that person, what of it? Isn't there a mitzvah to rejoice on a festival?
Right. So in the Mishnah, which I didn't give you here, this is just longer, and this one sentence is more or less enough, which is that there is a joy of the festival, and there is also like we just learned that like that's a good thing. We want to celebrate and be joyful on the festival. Why wouldn't we then also want to add a marriage or wedding, like other kinds of joy on top of it? That's the question the Mishnah is unpacking and what we're learning here. Keep going, Maddie.
Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said, and so too Rabbi Elazar said that Rabbi Oshaya said, a lot of sayings, and some say that Rabbi Elazar said that Rabbi Hanina said.
Rabbis are very serious about who gets credit for.
They really, yeah.
Keep going.
Okay, the Rabbi Hanina said, the reason that one may not get married on the intermediate days of a festival is because one may not mix one joy with another joy, as each requires its own celebration. Should I keep going until to the end?
Yeah, read the last bit, yeah.
Okay. Rabbi Bar Rav Huna said The reason is because one forsakes the rejoicing of the pilgrimage festival and occupies oneself with rejoicing with their spouse.
Great, thanks, Maddie. So here we're learning that we have this interesting principle here that she'ein marvin simcha v'simcha, that there's some nature of joy that shouldn't be mixed. And here, Rav Bar Huna is giving us a little bit more specificity here, which is if I'm celebrating the holiday, if I'm getting married in the intermediate days, I'm going to be more focused on celebrating with my spouse rather than the holiday itself. So here's the question I want to ask, which is, and I think the question I mostly want to discuss here, which is all joy the same? How does these different kinds of joy interact with each other? Is there a difference between the joy of a festival and a joy of a wedding? And I'm making wedding as distinct from a marriage, because I don't think that's what it's saying here. I think weddings particularly. What do people think? Especially the folks we haven't heard much from today. Any thoughts? Is all joy the same?
Repeat the question, please.
Yeah, the question is really about, is all joy the same? What does it mean for us to mix joy or not mix joy? Yeah, Helena, I see you making a face.
Well, every joy is different. A joy of a wedding, a joy of a brit, a joy of a festival, a joy of Shabbat. They are all different. They are joyous occasions, but they are different.
Yeah, without even deciding one is more or less than another, joy, not all joy feels the same. Yeah.
I was going to say that if you can't mix joys, different joys, then I can't have the joy of being with my friends and have the joy of eating a meal at the same time. So I don't agree with you can't mix joys.
I didn't say you cannot mix it. I just said that every joy is different.
No, Helena, the Gemara says you can't mix joys.
Yeah,
You were
I
very
know.
clear.
I saw that. I saw that in the Hebrew. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
yeah, I was answering the Gemara, not you, Helena.
Okay.
Right. All right. So pulling it apart, right? We have Helena makes the great point, which is joys don't all feel the same, right? The joy I get hanging out with my wife is not the same joy I get when I hang out with my child. Like those are just, they're both joyful, they're wonderful, they're just different, right? So I think that's a great example. And here, right, Ron, you reject this statement from the Talmud, which is to say, okay, if we're going to make this principle about not mixing joy, then like there are lots of things we can't do. Now, the question of whether or not festival and wedding is then broadly applicable is a different question. But I think in our broad strokes here, right, that there is a conflict here about, do I prioritize or who knows what? Yeah, David.
So I'm just wondering. I mean, almost lost you there for a minute. Sorry. We're talking about Chol Moed, and we're talking about not mixing the joys, if you will. Is that for a more practical reason of how do you put together a wedding while you're also just before Chol Moed having the joy of the festival, and after Chol Moed you're going to have another festival day, as opposed to literally being that worried about mixing, as if people can't tell why they're happy or joyful? Maybe, I don't know, but I'm a little, I guess I have a similar concern to Ron's, but maybe with a little twist.
Yeah, what you're saying makes me think about the principle of putting a fence around the Torah, right? The idea is we create boundaries so we don't accidentally transgress. That perhaps this is not really about joy, about whether or not festival and whether or not people will focus on one and the other, but maybe a fence to say, look, if you're in the middle of planning and implementing a wedding while it's the middle of Passover or Sukkot or whatever, like perhaps that might not be the best time to do that. You might find yourself distracted or or you might find yourself just the practicalities being overwhelming of what you're being asked to do, that maybe this is just a guardrail against taking on too much.
Fair enough, yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just sort of translating what you said into different words. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think that's a good and reasonable question that isn't obvious from the text that's here. There is other discussion happening around this, but I think even just what this is on its surface, it's not immediately obvious. Because I want to be thoughtful of time, and we have more to talk about. Not because I'm rushing us, but because I want to hold all of the different texts together as we discuss. We're going to move not that far because we're going to stay with weddings, and this is the part where you might find something familiar about this if you've been to a Jewish wedding before. Can I get a volunteer to read this text from Brachot? Anybody
I guess I can read it if nobody else wants
go,
to.
go for it, David.
Mara relates, Mar, son of Ravina, made a wedding feast for his son, and he saw the sages who were excessively joyous. He brought a valuable cup worth 400 zuz and broke it before them, and they became sad. The Gemara also relates, Rav Ashi made a wedding feast for his son, and he saw the sages who were excessively joyous. He brought a cup of extremely valuable white glass and broke it before them, and they became sad.
Are those saying that there's a limit to how much joy you're allowed to have?
Ron, that was the question I was going to ask. Something along those.
So I beat you.
Yeah, it's exactly right. But that's the question I think is worth. I mean, there's a bunch of things here. So first off, if you've been to a Jewish wedding, we talk about the smashing of the glass at the end of a wedding. This is not the only, but one of the sources for that custom. In the wedding, we often put it in a context about remembering broken things, or the temple, or Jerusalem, or whatever. Here, some of its sort of proto versions is a warning against excessive joy. And so the question I was going to ask, and Ron, you beat me to it in the perfect way, which is it possible? What does excessive joy mean? What is Mar and Rav Ashi, Mar, son of Ravina, and Rav Ashi, I'm sorry, what are they afraid of? What's going on here? Yeah, Sheila.
They're afraid that it's going to get out of hand. We know that you get drunk and all kinds of things happen, and you break glass. It's not one glass, you break all the glass. And besides which, if you become too, I think Judaism is against excessiveness. So if you are so excessive, you're not paying attention to the meaning of the wedding. In other words, the simcha now is beyond. It's like Purim. Purim, we no longer, we just go Meshuggah or Simchas Torah. I know that at our synagogue, we had to curtail certain things because they had gotten part of the service. We used to do things, and we had a chazan who got.
We don't need to get into specifics, Sheila.
All right. I mean, they just went too far.
Right.
And
So
my
here,
husband had to tame it down.
yeah. So we certainly know examples where events due to alcohol, although that's not clear, that's not obvious that that's what's happening here, right? It's not clear that it's because of alcohol, but certainly we know that alcohol plays a role in this. That sometimes things get out of hand, and we need to bring down the energy level. Purim is a wonderful example where alcohol plays a very uncomfortable role. And I think reasonably we should ask good questions about it. And I think also in conflict with some of the texts we learned above, where wine is being touted as a source of joy, again, we're being reminded moderation is an important key here. With this in mind, with all the things we've learned so far, and I've got one more text I want us to learn before we end today. What have we learned? What is this teaching us about the nature and quality and experience of joy? Because that's really what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about emotions. Joy, I think, is an important, essential feeling. It's something that we took a core emotions, joy and happiness are in there. What have we learned so far about joy? before I come to you, Sheila, I want to just give a chance
Yeah,
to.
fine.
Yeah, Richard.
We are obligated to rejoice.
Oh, hold on a second, Helena. Richard, I'll come back to you in a second. Richard, go for it.
It's okay.
Is joy just a temporary emotion? And since it's contrasts with sadness, but if you're in a wedding and you're joining two people together, like you're going to be going through multiple states of emotion. So is joy,
Richard, could you speak louder? We can't hear you.
is joy just a temporary emotion, is what I'm saying.
Right. So there's a reminder here that you're right, which is that joy, if we define it a particular way, is fleeting. It is momentary. It's something we experience, and then another emotion comes into play, or it overlaps. Here we see sadness as an example. I think another emotion, when we look at weddings in particular, since that's the context here, is an emotion around memory. That aren't always sad, but nostalgia, perhaps, especially when we think about people who are not there anymore, or something along those lines. So weddings in particular have lots of overlaying emotions. Joy is one of those, and you've reminded us here, joy is temporary, right? Maybe we feel it during a festival and then it goes away and we go back to some sort of norm or whatever. Helena.
That's what I wanted to say.
Would you like to say
Because
it
my
in a
mother
different way?
always used to, and it always took me by surprise. We went to a bar mitzvah or to a bris or to a wedding, and my mother would just quietly cry. And I say, why are you crying? It's a happy occasion. And she used to tell me, when you'll grow up, you'll understand why. I understand it now, because exactly for what you said, it brings up memories of the people that we lost, of the people who are not with us anymore, and all kinds of things.
Yeah. I mean, I think the examples being given here are really specific in the sense that, like, festivals and holidays and weddings are the ones that are most likely to bring us more than one feeling, right? Than like going out with to get a beer with a friend has a very different kind of joy than I'm sitting at a table with people I know and love, celebrating, whether it's wedding or festival or holiday or whatever. Those are very different, as we talked about before, different kinds of joy and have different impacts on us. Thank you for sharing that story, Helena. Ron, please.
I was going to go to the other end of the scale.
Perfect.
So many people today, when somebody passes away and you're sitting or not sitting Shiva, they turn it into a celebration of life instead of being sad, completely sad. So it's the whole other extreme, but it's the same thing. You have to temper the sadness with a little bit of joy.
Yeah.
Also, the funerals are not as sad, even if it's of a young person. We'd like to tell stories that can even occasion a laugh or certainly a smile. It may be, well, I mean, look, today it's just as bad as the old days too. And it was probably worse then, but we like to temper things. Again, it's moderation. Yeah, be happy, but remember, Jews have this memory thing. We're always remembering.
We are definitely obsessed with that.
Zachor Amalek.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we get it in both directions in our examples here, the ones that you gave and here in the Gemara, right? Which is we should feel joy, but not too much joy. Right? We should feel, in the example of the funerals, we should feel sadness, but not too much sadness. And while we're going to talk about,
I don't like when you say, but not too much. I think I like the word temper.
okay.
In other words, we can get I'm thinking, really sad cases, but yeah, it is extremely sad. But let's think of something positive.
Maybe balance might be a better word. Temper.
Balance, yeah.
I'll take the adjustment. Janice and then Tybal. Janice, you're muted. Janice, you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, my takeaway from the very beginning through this portion here is that our emotions are something that should be under our control, that we need to control. We are obligated to feel joy. We are being taught that we shouldn't have excessive joy, that this is an emotion that is controllable, that we should control.
Yeah. I think a lot about the quality that on one level we are, and we are also not our emotions, right? Like sometimes when I feel angry, which we talked about last week, it's not because I'm in control of it. I'm sort of out of control in some way. And if I feel excessively joyous, I'm out of control of my joy. And so I want to offer one slight take on it. Again, not disagreeing, Janice, but just adding another layer to it, which is perhaps a consistent awareness, right? Which is I might feel joy and I should be aware of how much I'm feeling joy or sadness or anger or whatever, so that I can temper it, balance it, keep it in mind. Not that I can always control it. Sometimes I can't, but certainly that I'm being really aware and conscious of what I'm doing and how I'm feeling and what I should do to either encourage or discourage particular feelings. Again, slight adjustment to what we were saying, Janice, but I think it's really, I love that example, right, of pulling both piece, the obligation piece back in, right? Like, oh, this is intentional. This is happening because of purpose. I really love that. Thank you, Janice. Tybal.
I just want to say it's obvious, but to me, there are two things that go into funerals, which is how the mourners feel. Like one of my students, her mother was 105 and she went peacefully. So even though my student was sad at a certain level, is who could have a better death? I mean, it was COVID at the end, but she was 105. So it both can be, but I know other people whose parents died in the 90s where they were so devastated and felt it wasn't long enough. So it's both the tone that the mourners, the definition of the mourners, and also I think the circumstance. I was just reminded yesterday, actually at B'nai Yeshurun Even Minyan, of a particularly difficult death in my extended family, and that's just going to be different. I mean, it's both the death itself, what may seem to be objective age and the circumstances, and did they accomplish their goals in life, but also the mourner's own emotion, to get back to emotional reaction. The same way gender reactions within gender aren't homogeneous, mourners' reactions even to what looks like a great death aren't homogeneous.
Great, I love that, and I would even just add the piece that I think that's true for joy.
Yeah.
That people express joy in lots of different ways, even if they're all at the same event, right? I wanted to say one other thing that you reminded me of, that this is sort of the brilliance. Judaism does death really well, just like as a structure, which is that the moment the funeral is over and we're doing Shiva, halachically speaking, we would no longer pay attention to the person who has died, and we pay attention to the people who are still alive. And it's their emotional state that becomes the central factor of our attention. Of course, we're still paying attention to the person who has died. I'm sort of exaggerating a little, but it's a reminder that the emotional state of the people in the room with us matter to us. They are of essential focus. I hadn't planned on this, but it's actually a perfect transition for our last text. So we're going to learn that together. So this is from Derech Eretz Zuta. It's a minor tractate in the Talmud. So it's not in the formal, 66 tractates of the Talmud. It's one of the minor tractates that comes, that's sort of separate in some way. But there's such cool stuff in here. And I found this and I thought it was worth sharing. So it says, be happy when sufferings come upon you. And again, this is a whole conversation about suffering we are not having today, but it's interesting nonetheless. Be happy when sufferings come upon you, because they deliver you from the punishment of Gehenna, right? So we should be happy when things are suffering because of some sort of metaphysical understanding of what happens at death. Okay, fine. Rejoice at your table when the hungry benefit from it, so that your life may be prolonged in this world and the world to come. You should be, so translating, you should be happy to open up your table for the people who need it, because there's a reward that comes to you for doing that. So not only are you doing the right thing, you should be joyful because there's a reward coming for it. Last one, be happy when you donate gifts of charity quietly, so that the anger of the angel of death may be diverted from you. As it is stated, a gift in secret pacifieth anger. I didn't translate this myself. And present in the bosom strong wrath. This is from Mishle. I'm not going to guarantee that translation is particularly good.
Now tell us this in English.
Yeah. I think the point of it being, regardless of the quote, the text from Mishle, which is giving tzedakah, giving justly, gifts of charity. And actually, it's interesting, right? Here's the language, right? Doing so quietly, right? So that here the angel of death, sort of like before you die, like doing the good things in private, like be happy with that, because there are real rewards for that, even though people don't know about it. Do good in private, because that has good that comes from it, separate from the public nature of giving publicly.
We discussed this, didn't we?
We've talked about similar ideas in other classes.
Yeah.
I want to pull out a couple of things that I think are really interesting, which is sort of tying it back to our conversation about obligations at the beginning. The rabbis do have a concept that obligations and rewards do happen. It's not like there isn't like mathematics to it per se, which is to say that everybody's got sort of their own view on it. It's not like, oh, this obligation has this reward. There isn't a concept of reward for the things that we do. Again, broader conversation that we could certainly spend some time into. And here we see some of those, right, as a manifestation of these principles, right? When you suffer, it's because something worse would have happened, and you're being saved from it. When you do good and you feed the hungry, your life will be extended. If you give tzedakah in private, you are basically living longer, right? Everything has to do with living in this case. And this is actually part of a larger section of other kinds of advice that exist. I just sort of took this section that was all about joy. Here we have a relationship between joy and reward. Be happy because there is a reward coming. I think the principle here, less about rewards, is that you can have joy about things that you're doing in the present without knowing the consequences. What I mean to say is, you can do good and feel good about it without knowing if it's going to save the world, or if it's going to do miraculously tremendous things, or you're going to get a reward. Doing these things can make you feel good in the present, even if you don't know what the reward is going to be. And that. And I think when we hold all this together, and this is where I want to use our last 10 minutes or so, is what we learn about joy from all of this. What are we learning from the Gemara? What are the rabbis? I'm going to stop screen sharing here. What are we learning about what the rabbis think about joy here? If we're going to walk away or turn off the screen, as the case may be, and we're going to go live our lives, what have the rabbis taught us about how we should live our life in the relationship to joy? What do you think? Any thoughts? Yeah, Helena, I see you.
Can you read my mind?
I can see your face.
So that's something that my mother taught me, and that's something that I am always upset in the shul when they ask for donations and they say the amount of donation that certain people are giving. Because my mother always taught me about matan beseter. And
Giving private.
Yeah. So give it in privately, and it's up to you. And nobody knows how much you can afford to give. So when you squeeze somebody, it's it brings not a nice feeling upon them, if you know what I mean. Okay, that's one thing. About too much joy and too much sadness. When I was sitting Shiva for my husband, it was really tragic and was sudden. And we didn't say goodbye to him. So very tragic. Somebody gave me a book about sitting Shiva. And I couldn't sleep for 2 weeks. So I was reading the book. It was a big book. It's somewhere in the house somewhere. And I read it. And it specifically said that it's not good and it's not healthy to להתאבל מדי הרבה.
I don't know how to translate that.
You don't know how to translate it?
No.
I'll try. To be over too much in mourning. So and it took me for a while to understand what they meant, okay? Because they said, what do you mean? I mean, really, I was really in shock and saddened. And they tell me not to mourn too much. It was a certain disregard. And it took me quite a few months to understand it. I didn't have a choice. I had to go back to work right away because all my assets were frozen, and I had 2 kids, and I had to sustain ourselves. So it took me quite a few months to realize what they mean. So you can go into such deep sorrow and sadness that it harms yourself and the people around you. So in Judaism, I found there are a lot of amazing things that you learn from it. And as you get older, you see how much wisdom there is in a lot of things.
We're going to talk more about sadness next week, I think. But I think you're, so first of all, thank you for sharing.
Same thing about simcha.
Yeah, 100%, right? Which is to say, the importance here of balance, right?
Yeah.
Just to draw out the principle, right? That like leaning too heavily into one emotional state, I don't want to say dangerous isn't the right word, but something like
it can harm yourself.
For sure. Let's say it comes with risk.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, thank you for adding that. David, I see your hand up.
David, you are muted.
Thank you, Helene. I clicked on it 3 times, and maybe that was the problem. I was just going to say that I agree with this idea of balance. That certainly seems to be what the rabbis are saying. I think the other thing that maybe is implied, because they're talking about it in the context of Chagim, is that, you know, we could say, why do we have these Chagim? God doesn't need them. I mean, God has everything anyway. So why do we have them? And maybe that's why we have them, that we need opportunities to celebrate and have some joy, because sometimes the period that's whole, if you will, ordinary, could be too oppressive. And even Shabbat once a week feels like that. At least to me, a lot of the time, that idea of an island in time where you can actually rest and recuperate and have some joy and sit around the Shabbos table and talk and not worry about whatever happened during the previous week or might happen in the next week. So I think the cycles of time we have is part of what they're kind of talking about, even if it's specifically talking about Chagim. So I'm just offering that. The other thing I will say, I actually agree with you, Helena. I think it's very much Maimonidean, if you will. When we talk about the highest level of charity would be the anonymous gift. And I think many of one's gifts are that way, or one tries for that. What counters on the other side, and why we end up having some of these gifts in public, for better or worse, is and I learned this a while back when I was involved in a fundraising campaign. If you don't do it publicly, especially if you're leading a campaign, somebody's going to say, then you're not motivating your friends, and they don't know that you've actually done, put your money where your mouth is. You may talk the talk, but you have to walk the walk, and it sometimes has to be in public. So I'm just offering that as an explanation for why that sometimes is done, even if it seems sometimes unseemly. And the other thing I'll offer is I always start with thank you, and I finish with thank you when I'm trying to raise money from somebody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for what you've already done. Thank you for what you're doing, whatever it is. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, David. I want to say a couple of things. One is giving anonymously is the second highest. The first highest is employing someone. In that eightfold.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So yes. The other thing I want to say is I wrote this online about Tu B'Shvat, and I quote Masechet Rosh Hashanah, where it says, "What is the reason for the New Year of Trees is set in Shvat, which is this month right now?" Rabbi Elazar said, Rabbi Yoshai said, the reason is since that time most of the year's rains have fallen, and most of the season winter has yet to come. I'm going to drop it into the chat for those who want to be able to read it. And what I said about it, which made me think about, or which you just said reminded me of it, which is that we're always in the middle, right? We're never really at the beginning of a story or at the end of the story. We're always in the middle. And I wrote that Tu B'Shvat is less about the trees so much as it's an opportunity in the holidays in general and the festivals. And again, repeating what you just said, really they're moments, they're markers, reminders about where we are in the journey in the middle. Right? We're always in the middle. We're born, we die, everything is in the middle. And the holidays become opportunities. And I think to sort of pull us back into the sort of reflection of joy in our last minute or two here, is that we are constantly being invited, if you will, by the tradition, by our life, to feel joy. Not at every moment, not by itself, but that we are invited. Rabbi Brad Artson often talks about mitzvot as invitations. We are invited by the way we live life to feel things. I think joy is one of them, and it can be easy in our very fast-paced world to just move from thing to thing. I think part of the reminder of using the framework of festivals or weddings is they slow us down. And it's really hard to feel things if we don't slow down. And I think joy is one of those too, right? It's hard to feel joy when you're running from thing to thing. It's when you sit and you have a cup of coffee. It's when you sit and you're sitting with a friend or a loved one. It's when you are stopping to celebrate a moment. Slowing down and feeling joy, those invitations are opportunities for us to really dig into it. And part of what I think the challenge of saying, let's not mix up joys, is again, sort of drawing on what Janice was saying about control, but really a sense of we are in control of what we pay attention to in our awareness. And we can say, I'm feeling lots of things in this moment. I'm feeling joy because I'm here with this, and I'm feeling joy because of this, and I'm feeling joy because of this, and those can be all separate things. And it's also true, right, when we talk about the excessive joy, that we have to that it's okay to invite other feelings in. As many of you know, and you know, my wedding was amidst a very powerful tragedy in my community. And for us, joy and sorrow lived in relationship. It was such a huge part. And so we talked about it a lot today, and we'll talk about sadness next week. I think it is a powerful lesson to remember that no emotion generally is by itself. Almost every emotion we have is coupled with others, is partnered with others, is tempered, balanced, whatever, with other emotions, because that's what being a human is. It's not really that we feel one thing, or even that we feel joy, a bunch of different kinds of joy. We feel all of it, all at the same time. We talked about anger last week. Anger is a part, you can feel angry and joy together. In fact, there's a part of anger that feels joyful, right? A righteous indignation can feel joyful. There's a real sense of reminder when we talk about joy, first of all, that it's a good thing, that we should be happy. When we do good things, it should make us feel good, and joy is good. And that it's okay to feel it with other things too. It doesn't negate it either. I'm not a therapist. I'm not going to play one on TV. And so I want to be wary that I'm a rabbi and not a therapist and not an expert in emotions. But I do think when we pull back what the rabbis are telling us here, they're inviting us more than anything else to always pay attention, to see what's happening both inside and outside. And those are good things. That's a good way of living life, is by paying attention. Thanks everybody for being here. Early Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. I know we started a bit late. We'll continue where we moved a little late, but I hope all of you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week on Thursday night. I've been sending out updates and links and all that, everything else. If you want to sign up for my email list, you'll get my emails in general, but also you'll get the updates for this class. You can sign up here. And again, always a thank you for B'nai Yeshurun for hosting this class and the Thursday night spotlights. And make sure to check up for future programs there. So thanks, everybody.